Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to another Webinar Wednesday, number 316 in our series, dating back all the way back to 2013. Good afternoon, I'm Kelly Bearden. I'm the director of the CSU Bakersfield Small Business Development Center. And being webinar number 316, this must be April 17th, 2024. Got a great program, a great guest. We're going to be talking about the need for small businesses to be engaged in advocating politically for what they believe in or for what they are concerned in for their business. And today we're going to jump into what I like to call the power of persuasion, letting your voice be heard, ways that you can talk to your elected officials about some of the changes that either have happened or are going to be happening. Some of the things, such as we're going to talk about today, a tax credit that's set to expire next year that I would imagine, since 90% of small businesses are using, you have been using it for the last few years. We'll talk about some of the impacts that have had through either legislation, through propositions, through local, state, and federal laws. And one of those is California's minimum wage that took effect on April 1st. And that is for businesses that are actually franchises, quick serve restaurants, fast food restaurants that actually have over 60 units in the state of California. And so that is raising the minimum wage for those employees to $20 an hour. And it's the ripple effect and the effect that it has that has so many small businesses concerned. We'll jump into, this 2024. One of our least favorite topics has been the beneficial ownership information and that legal filing that needs to be done by certain businesses. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some of the other political issues that might be affecting small business. We'll be talking also today about the email scam that is targeting small businesses that is personal to us because it involves coming from the SBDC saying that we will have a grant for you and you need to provide $300. We at the SBDC, we do not have grants. A lot of our funding partners and the great organizations I talked with, they have grants for small businesses. So we'll mention that scam. We'll jump into our capital quarter next week and talk about, some of the areas of finance that we need to look at. So our capital quarter, it's a pass this week, a hall pass for it. As always, we'll take your questions live at the conclusion of today's webinar. Live questions answered. Maureen, our producer, will be working our chat box, and she will be putting today's resources that we talk about today. We'll go into the chat box that you can snag and actually pull away immediately from this webinar today. So, a few things to talk about before we bring out our special guest today. And some of those things are going to be dealing with, as we have talked about for many weeks, and that is going to be the actual BOI, the business ownership information that needs to be filed. And so there is a litigation going on in order to prevent small businesses that might have thought they needed to apply. That is still in limbo. So right now, the only thing moving forward with the business information, and remember, this is to reduce trafficking and illicit businesses and drugs and things like that. That is a U.S.-based portal that is FinCEN, which is Financial Crimes Unit. And so what you need to do is put in your information to validate that your LLC, your corporation, or your other small business actually is subject to, not subject to any provisions in illegal activities. So, that being the point, those businesses that have an LLC, incorporated this year, they need to go in. If you have done your legal filings beginning on January 1 through March 31st. So if you are a new LLC, if you've changed from, say, a sole proprietorship, etc., then you will need to go in. So few things there. Also, that we need to talk about as well is going to be that email that some people are receiving that say they're part of the SBDC and they are going to provide you with a $30,000 grant. Important things to note, we do not provide loans and grants. We provide technical assistance as far as training, like what we're doing right now, and also the one-on-one business consulting with our advisors. So we have advisors that can help you. We do not do grants and loans. So we'll never request your Social Security or banking information. We'll never ask you to submit $300 so you can get $30,000. So I think that hopefully the word is getting out on that and we're not having too many people that are affected. So one of the things that is kind of politically based and could be expiring in 2025 that I alluded to was from the 2017 tax credits. And this was one that affected small business. And what it did was it allowed for a 20% deduction of qualified business income. 90% of small businesses are actually using this now. It has been mentioned as being the biggest tax cut in small business history and does a little bit of leveling the playing field for our small businesses against larger corporations, and has really kind of been a job creator. It has actually enabled small businesses to raise wages and to grow and compete for workers at a critical time in the U.S. economy. So a lot of these tax credits that were passed in 17, you might agree with some, you might not agree with others, but I think that we're kind of uniform in our belief that for small businesses, the 20% deduction of qualified business income has been a real boom for small businesses and allowing them to do a lot of things rather than pay taxes for that 20% of the money. So that is something to keep an eye on as the 2025 expiration draws near, and as an example, a good example of what kind of are the political issues out there for small businesses that could be affecting you. We talked a little bit about the minimum wage and, the small businesses that have conveyed to me that it's not about, their 60 locations or their franchises. I've talked to basically zero businesses that have 60 or more franchises in the state of California. So this is significantly the ripple effect or the unintended consequences of probably good intentions that are going bad for those businesses that are infected, including mom and pop businesses, smaller independent operators, and a lot of struggling small businesses that are actually coming out of the pandemic and other problems related to that. So the supply chain issues, the competing for workers, those are still going to continue. But what this does is it kind of changes the landscape according to many of the businesses I've talked to, because when at least, and I've been around a while, when I grew up, fast food enterprises, they were your gateway into employment. They were your gateway to the workforce. And now a lot of these restaurants are more concerned that the gateway is now going to be mom and pop and independent restaurants where they're going to be paying lower wages and they're going to then have the positions that are open. And a lot of their qualified people that they have had for years that they're paying maybe $17, $50, $18, et cetera, are going to go to the higher wage where even though they might have a higher skill level that is really needed at that particular area. So that is really the concern and kind of the political aspect of it today. Small businesses, I'm telling you, you got to become more politically involved in what is happening in your environment. And well, that's what we're talking about today. So some of the other things, there were some changes. There was some cleaning up done to that legislation that, for example, AB 610 was passed, and it allowed for a number of kind of clear up areas which carved out some fast food chain operations that are in hotels, restaurants, convention centers, and other venues. And, some of the sporting venues and other things were able to carve their way out. So we need a way for small businesses to to either carve their way out of that or become incentivized in order to either pay higher wages or to figure out a way to have this impact them less. On something that's not a political at all, but is really kind of an issue facing, I think, many of us in the San Joaquin Valley, and I know definitely those of us in Kern County, is the need for daycare businesses. And childcare businesses have dropped substantially from the pandemic. It is affecting a lot of people who have, school-age children or preschool children, and impacting their ability to stay involved in the workforce. So our solution to that is a wonderful training program to assist small businesses to work, to do childcare out of their home, become licensed through the state of California up to six students, six pupils, six kids in your home, and figure out a way where it's a win-win for everyone, where it's affordable childcare for the workers, but yet there's ways to manage that particular business to where the entrepreneur makes really a nice wage out of just six people in their house. And so there's a lot of ways to do that. We're doing it through a program called Nurture that is up in Sacramento, where ironically we are producing and actually doing this webinar live today. They do it online, and it's online in English and Spanish. The 12-week course, the next one starts on May 15th. $1,000 startup grants, and we're working with some other entities in order to provide more as far as startup grants. And to talk to a Nurture coach, you can actually pull that phone number right there, or Maureen will have it in the chat. A lot of our webinars, most of our webinars, a few of them don't because of the contractual relationships with our speakers and other reasons. Could be, pilot error on my part, forgetting to hit that record button. But, most of them end up in YouTube. And our YouTube channel, CSUB SBDC, has now well over 400 subscribers. You can subscribe to find out when our next one is being up. To find out or to review this particular webinar, it'll be there in probably 3 or 4 days. So go to our YouTube channel for any of the older webinars, even if it's only a few days. So for your human resource hotline for employers is a great resource provided by the California Employers Association, and it's to provide employers with no-cost answers to your human resource questions. You'll see a number of actual counties there listed, and you can call based on the county listed, their own individual phone number, and talk to a California Employer Association professional on an HR-related question at no cost for you. A lot of our tools, we showed you our YouTube channel, but there's a lot of tools that we use in order to assist small businesses. And a lot of those tools range from being able to use Live Plan and be able to construct a business plan. It's our Webinar Wednesday, our YouTube. A wonderful resource that we'll revisit pretty soon is our Clayton Leadership Transition Plan. And that is a multi-generational plan in order to help you transition your business. If you're doing like Morgan Clayton did in the Bakersfield area, transitioning to the next generation of family to run that particular business. Some cases it's not family, it can be employee ownership based. We still continue to see a lot of people, a lot of business owners transitioning out of small businesses. There's a huge opportunity for those that are either wanting to buy or to sell their small business, and some really unique tools and programs to assist you. So contact us at the SBDC if you are going there. We're not talking about amnesty. It's not officially back yet, but there's a good chance that the employee retention credit might come back with their amnesty program again. Stay tuned for that. If you took the employee retention credit and then realized that you had to go in and amend tax returns dating back to 2020, you're going to most likely, in most cases, pay additional tax that could include penalty and interest that were a condition of receiving those funds in 2023, even though it goes back to your tax year of 2020, 2021, and 22. So that will potentially come up, and there was a nice escape hatch where you could retain 25% of the money and give the rest back and not fall into any of those potential IRS issues that would come up. Okay, enough of me. So that brings us to today's special guest, and our special guest today is here live with me in Sacramento, and that is Jovan Agee, who is the founder. And Jovan Agee is the founder of Agee Global Systems and Solutions, which is a government affairs company that partners with businesses, organizations, governments to develop strategies that promote growth. In addition to leading AGS, nice acronym. Mr. Agee has also held several political appointees. Most recently is the Deputy Treasurer of the state of California. In his capacity there, he was charged with developing California's housing and economic development plan and strategy. He's also a very forward thinker, great strategic thinker, and a reputation being called upon for counsel to solve today's greatest challenges. We have a lot of great challenges for small business. That's why he's here today. Jovan, come on in here. It's great to have you on Webinar Wednesday. And we're going to let you take it away and talk a little bit about yourself. And let me stop my share and bring you in. And there we go. So bring you in here in just a second as we get things situated here. So take it away. Because my first question is, I want to actually bring you in here, and I'll get in here as well. There's enough room for both of us. So why don't you give your viewers your background and even more what you have done, being a fine San Joaquin Valley native and resident.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. As was said, Jovan Agee, founder and CEO of Agee Global Solutions. Agee Global Solutions is a government affairs consulting business. We have 4 verticals that we focus on, one of them being electoral, so all things campaigning. Secondarily, we help individuals and organizations with lobbying. The third pillar is real estate development, and then the fourth is finance. So helping provide capital, whether public or private capital, for all sorts of needs, whether it's business, film industry, real estate development. My firm helps with those things. We also advise government in terms of their public finance needs as well.
So you have a very broad background in politics, going back to the city of Sacramento and many others. So how did you get involved in politics?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to make this as concise as possible, but the reference to the San Joaquin Valley when I was being introduced was I was actually born in Madera, California, and I was raised in Fresno, California, so not too far from Bakersfield. After leaving Fresno, I spent some time in Southern California and Los Angeles area, then finished up at Sacramento State where I got my degree in government, ended up getting an internship with a lobbyist. And so that's how I ended up in government about 20 years ago. As you've heard, I've had a host of different political appointments, with the most recent being the state treasurer's office. And that's essentially how I found my way into it, through a paid internship. At the time, I wasn't necessarily thinking that I was going to be in government, but it was paid. I was in college. And so ended up sticking with it and have just been very fulfilling. I love to help people better understand how to navigate the system.
Well, obviously, from my background in small business, small businesses are not the greatest advocates for themselves. And because of that, that's why we're here today. I'm going to turn you into the greatest advocates, your self-lobbying, looking out for your self-interest, looking out for legislation that affects you and your small businesses. So how can, or do you even think that small businesses should be involved in politics? And if not, why, or if so, why so?
Yeah, definitely. And, I think part of the idea around politics is demystifying what politics even is. And so another way to think about politics, for those who may, get an upset stomach when the word even comes up, is politics is really nothing more than civic engagement. To what extent, you may be civically engaged depends on what your needs are. But oftentimes, people hear the word politics and they say, oh my gosh, the Democrats and Republicans, they're always arguing, they're never getting anything done. which may be true in some ways, but politics is also, for those of you in Bakersfield, bring it home. The city is working on this general plan for the year 2045. So getting involved in what the city of Bakersfield is looking to do, the next 2 to 3 years in terms of finalizing its 20-year plan for your region. That's getting involved politically, particularly as a business, because or a small business, is if you look at what your local electeds are thinking in terms of the future of your city, where are communities looking to be built, where is commercial development looking to be built, you want to know that, because if you're thinking about renting space, leasing a space, buying a building, you don't want to buy it in an area where the city is growing away from. You would be wise to look and see where the city's vision in the future is. And so that's one reason. The other reason is I always say, I've tried to pay attention to in my own life and look at what individuals and organizations who are successful are doing. And it's not coincidental that, Amazon, Tesla, it's not coincidental that they spend a lot of money for lobbyists who get engaged in politics. So although you may not have a lot of money to engage and to hire lobbyists, you have to figure out a way to do it. And there's no better venues or entities or vehicles than the SBDCs or your chambers of commerce, because what they become is your de facto lobbyists. They become the entities, but just like Amazon and Tesla don't do, they don't hire their lobbyists and then disengage. They don't hire their lobbyists and say, oh, go figure it out for me. No, what they do is they retain the talent, which in this case would be your SBDC or your chamber. They retain the talent, they enter in relationship with the talent, and then they interact with the talent to make sure that those entities or those individuals know what they need so they can best represent them. So the same would be true with small businesses.
And along that line, I'm bringing up the trade associations and chambers of commerce that have a political action committee. It's good to be involved because I think from the chamber's perspective, I know our Kern County Hispanic Chamber and Greater Bakersfield Chamber both get involved, engaged politically in those areas. So it's good to engage those organizations as well, particularly on the local level, right?
Correct. I think, it's you can never be too engaged politically. That's what I would say. So it's not really something I can say, an hour a week, 2 hours a week. My advice would be, and I'm not just saying this because I'm in the industry, I'm saying this because I've sat on both sides of the table. I've been the one, as I am now, trying to advocate and push the government to do something to benefit either myself or my clients. But I've also sat on the other side. As I stated, I was the former deputy treasurer for the state of California, where I was responsible to figure out how to best invest the $3.2 trillion worth of assets that California has. I also was senior advisor for former Sacramento Mayor Kevin Johnson. So I've done it from local as well as state, and I've sat on the other side where people come in and they lobby. And make no mistake about it, those people who are in our faces the most are the ones that usually will get something of what they want. Now, you don't ever get all of what you want in politics, but what you try to do is get some of what you want. You continue to build upon that, year after year to hopefully get closer to what it is that you have in mind for your constituency.
So Mayor Johnson, you never played him one-on-one, did you?
No, I didn't. He and I were both post-our basketball careers.
Yeah, NBA former star.
Correct.
Many years, great player. Okay, so you also mentioned trade associations, and I kind of wanted to go there for, because I think a lot of people do engage, or a lot of people should engage their trade associations and depend on it, but there's only so much that you can get out of a trade association. And maybe I'm wrong on this, so correct me if I am. But, for example, I had a client come up to me regarding the state of California with the minimum wage going up and saying, oh, I really needed to reach out. I'm a member of the California Restaurant Association, but sometimes I think it's even potentially even out of their hands, because when legislation is enacted, oftentimes it does come up from business, large business, like you mentioned, but also small business. So I think there's a question in here somewhere. Mm-hmm. But so how can they actually engage trade associations or know when to engage a trade association and maybe more of a grassroots effort?
Yeah, and part of this question goes into a philosophy that I have of know thyself, know thy product, know thy marketplace. And oftentimes if I'm writing that to somebody, say, what the heck is he talking about, right? But when I use that principle that I really kind of govern myself with and advise others to do the same, it's really understand where you fit in the ecosystem. So when you think about society, when you think about humanity, it's no different than a team. It's how do you fit into that? Because if you aren't clear, number one, on know thyself, who are you as a business owner? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? Have you prioritized it? We know it could be 50 different things, but if you're trying to engage with a trade association, you're paying your dues, and you haven't figured that out, it's going to be very hard for them to figure that out. You can't outsource rule number one, know thyself. Because then what could happen is you do leave it up to others to define it, who you're paying dues to, and then you get upset once they define it in a way that you don't like, right? So I would encourage any business owner, small or big, is really doing some of that personal inventory. I get it, you're busy, but you're going to have to take some time to really begin to say, of the 10 to 25 to 50 things that may be a priority for me, what are the 1 to 2 priorities that are realistic? And that could be low-hanging fruit. So, maybe you want your business to become a $5 million a year organization. Have you had a $250,000 a year yet? Right? So that's how you begin to break it down. Because if not, what's going to happen is you're engaging with a trade association who also has to figure out how to prioritize all of its members' needs, but it's going to be able to best prioritize those members' needs with those members who've already prioritized their own needs. So I would say that's know thyself. Know thy product is the second part. So if you understand what you're trying to sell, maybe your goals are not realistic. So if you are, in an environment where maybe you're selling t-shirts, right? $5 million in the next year may not be realistic unless you already have a tremendous Rolodex, you have great brand ID, things of that nature. So then that leads to the third, which is know your marketplace. So if you have your priorities, which is know thyself, know thy product. So if you're selling t-shirts in this example, know thy marketplace. If you're in a jurisdiction where maybe fashion is not the primary industry, maybe you're not in LA, maybe you're not in New York, again, $5 million is going to be even harder to get to given the fact of what your product is. And then secondarily, you're in a market that's industry is not one of the top, 1 or 2 industries. So I think, those 3 principles, know thyself, know thy product, know thy marketplace, if you could begin to really answer those things, then I think as you engage with trade associations, you'll be able to get more out of them. And you'll be able to do more to give them to do more on your behalf.
Great information. Outstanding. I think the other thing in there is knowing thyself, knowing thy business and product is also, when you do look at it, is look at it objectively. It's so hard for business owners to look objectively at their own business and what's going on in those areas. So objectively, or have somebody give you an honest appraisal of what they think of it. That's what the SBDC is for. Okay, next question. Since we're talking about, working with different levels of government, different needs, your political need, your advocating need might be different from depending on which government entity, which either federal, state, or local. What do you think has the greatest impact on daily operations?
Again, that goes back to what we just talked about, know thyself, know thy product, know thy marketplace. Once you've taken an objective assessment of those things, you now can begin to strategically plan. And when you talk about these trade associations, the trade associations should be a tool in your toolbox. What do I mean by that? So let's take the business owner who's trying to sell t-shirts, for example. It could be anything. You could be selling hot dogs. You could be a street vendor. I would always encourage to go to the levels of government where you can have the greatest impact. And usually that's local level. It's your school boards, right? It's your water districts, it's your utility districts. It's where if, you see these $50,000 plate presidential dinners and governor's dinners, darn well that where am I going to get a $50,000 check from? But can you write a $50 check? Can you write a $25 check? Can you write a $5 check? And with some of these lower level races, you can make that kind of impact, and it goes a lot further. So part of my response is twofold. One, engage your trade associations because they can do some of the more macro level politics, the federal stuff, the state stuff, and even some of the broader local stuff that you may not have the wherewithal or capacity to engage in. But then you yourself directly as the owner, do some of your more direct political engagement with some of those local bodies because guess what? They do contracting. So if you have a t-shirt business, schools need t-shirts. If you have a local hot dog vending, schools outsource for cafeteria foods. So those are business opportunities that you're building by being politically engaged, and not only you knowing what they need and understanding their needs, but they also know that you exist. So it's also a way to have some in-kind and free marketing for your business by simply showing up and being engaged.
And on that line, I would guess that there is a great need also to be aware of what's happening locally. You mentioned the general plan for the city of Bakersfield. So understanding what is happening locally, and a lot of that is dealing with city councils and board of supervisors, and they're generally pretty accessible.
Very accessible. So most city councils and board of supervisors in the state of California have what is known as like the 72-hour rule, where they have to produce their agendas 72 hours before their board meetings. So then I hear oftentimes I go around the state, people say, well, I don't know what goes on at City Hall. I don't know what goes on at my board of supervisors. They keep the information from me, right? So number one is we have to shift away from this victim mentality. When you're in a democracy, I learned, 20 years ago, I was told when I came into the space, you'll get what you're big enough to take. That was a very crude and shrewd way of saying that democracy is a full contact sport. It's something that you'll only be able to be visible or be seen or get what at the level of which you're engaging. That's a more politically correct of saying the statement that was given to me. And so when you look at those city council, when you look at those board of supervisor hearings, it's not about what they're keeping from you. It has to be public information. And if anything comes up that's not public information, then you hold them accountable for that. But I would argue that 90 to 95% of everything that is happening is going to be itemized in the agenda. Now, there may be some things that come up as special agenda items that are voted on right before the meeting convenes, but that's where you then pay attention. Most of these meetings now, because of COVID, are accessible online. So in addition to now having the agenda, which agenda is information. So when we talk about engaging politically, you want to be informed. You don't want to just be out there trying to play the game of democracy or playing the game of politics and you're lost. You're deer in the headlights. You're, reaching around in the dark to try to figure it out. No, these information like the agendas, when we talk about these campaigns, that's information. With the information, you then should be proceeding or engaging with whatever body we're talking about to advance what we talked about earlier, which is your priorities or the priorities of the group by which you're engaging with.
Great insights. So can you also, speaking of insights, maybe provide some insights and guidance for businesses that want to get involved in politics and want to be more effective in their involvement?
Yeah, I would encourage you to really, again, understand what it is you're trying to sell. So whatever that product is, you should be doing your market research and truly understanding where are the places and spaces that need what I have to offer. And I think that until we change our perspective about government, one of the things I say all the time is, when I do my trainings around the state is, how do you feel about government? I ask the audience, how do you feel about government? And, the audience is often mixed. You have some people who think fairly fondly of it. You have others who think negative of it. Then you have some that are kind of just somewhere in between. But until you start thinking positively about this partner that you have, because government is your partner, whether you like it or not. And why are they your partner? Because you're paying them. They're taking some of your profit called taxes and other fees. So whether you like it or not, government is your partner. And if you think negatively of your partner, then you're going to cultivate a negative relationship. As you begin to think more positively about, okay, this is my partner, whether I like it or not, how do I maximize my relationship with my partner to create the most healthy environment possible? So one of the things I say is that I look at taxes as an investment, meaning that if you look at it as an investment, whether it's something that you voluntarily do or not, you should expect a return on your investment. So what I would do if I was you is go to, Kern school district, whatever it's called. I'm not 100% sure, but whatever your local school district is called. And I would look and see where the dollars are being spent. Why? Because they're your dollars. I would go to the city council, look at where the dollars are being spent. Why? Because they're your dollars. The same thing with your county. Then I would say, are businesses like mine and others getting a return on their investment or a return on their taxes? If not, then you should be questioning what your partner is doing, your investment partner is doing with your dollars. And if nothing else, if you're not getting those direct dollars back, maybe you're getting that investment back in the form of contracts. And I want you to add that concept to your toolbox, because too often I see small businesses and all they're trying to go to SBDCs and chambers about is, how can you help me get more money? And oftentimes they only exclusively mean that in the form of liquid capital, which is grants or loans or things of that nature. But contracting, that's another opportunity that you should be looking at. And do your own homework, because no leader appreciates a constituent or a stakeholder who's done their own homework. So now you're going to your SBDC, say, hey, I learned about this RFP that Bakersfield City Council has put out. Can you help me figure out how to respond to this RFP? Right? It's now a completely different conversation versus you going to that leader from scratch and they have to help you figure out, the beginning and ending of your business plan.
Jovan, many of our small businesses can't afford lobbyists. They're not in that position. What advice can you give them to become more effective?
Number one, get involved, because the resources are being brought to you like this. I mean, you are literally hearing from a lobbyist. So right now you are actually getting free consultation from a lobbyist. The other is make sure that you are encouraging others to sign up to be members of chambers and other entities so that they have more dollars to hire potentially more lobbyists or to bring in trainings. I love going around the state to do trainings. In fact, I'm here as a result of your leader hearing me in a training. That training was actually funded by the state of California. So because of that training and your leader doing exactly what he's encouraging you to do, which is to get engaged. Had he had not been present in that training in Fresno, he probably wouldn't know I exist or that I do what I do. But because he's practicing what he preaches, he met me, made a request of me, which is what we talk about lobbying. He essentially, one step of lobbying is knowing how to make an ask, a request. So he did that of me, and as a result, I'm here. But what he's now saying is, how do we go to that next level, right? So if you want people like myself to come to Bakersfield and do other things, the reality is has to be money available from somewhere. And we can't solely look at the government to do something we're not doing. So that's going to mean that we're going to have some skin in the game. Now, you maybe yourself can't pay $10,000 a month or $10,000 a year to have that kind of help on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis. But do you know 10 people that would be willing to give $100? Do each of those 9 other people know maybe 9 people that are willing to give $100? If you start to organize in that fashion, then we start to see how we can start to tackle some of those bigger problems that we have, whether they're monetary or whether they're policy, by simply looking beyond ourselves and figuring out how do we grow our tent, how do we grow our base, how do we grow our body to provide for some of the financial capital and intellectual capital that we need.
So one thing that I think I've heard is that most state laws, and there's a lot of state laws that get passed every year.
Yeah.
Most state laws actually are brought to the legislators. So that, I think, is a great opportunity for you, if you have an idea that can change or is better California, is to have that meeting with your assembly member or your senator, your state senator. So what are the processes involved in that, and how can people become more engaged on that state level?
Yeah, so the easiest process would be for you to reach out to your assembly member, your senator. If you don't know how to get a hold of them, just Google California Assembly, Google California Senate, and then type in "Find My Representative." And there's literally a box on both of those websites where you can type in your address, whether it's your home address or your business address, and find out who your representative is. They'll have both their Sacramento numbers as well as their district numbers. You can call those offices and tell them you have a bill idea. Tell them you're a constituent. They'll more than likely ask for you to submit the idea. The idea doesn't have to be super sophisticated, doesn't have to be polished. It can just be a concept that you don't even understand where it fits into the California law. And they should work with you to help you build that out. That's one way. The second way is to work with the trade associations that we talked about, all the names mentioned. And if you have an idea or a concept that has broad support, I would actually argue that's a better way to go. because when you deal with a state that has 38 million people, and we have 120 legislators who on average introduce anywhere from 3,500 to 4,000 bills a cycle, a year, there's competition, which means that every idea, whether good or not, is not going to be able to get traction, meaning it's not going to be able to be introduced. So if you have an idea, what I would actually encourage you to do, even though you can do it, you have the right to do it, to contact your legislator directly, I would actually encourage you to bounce it off of other people, whether it be your trade association members, whether it be people in your community, or both. Because you going to your elected saying, hey, I have an idea versus we have an idea. And if that we is, a couple hundred people, a couple thousand people, that's going to get the attention of that elected a lot more than if you just go with that one idea by yourself.
So one thing you brought up that I found fascinating was in working with a lot of the local governments, your school districts, what's the opportunity for procurement, the opportunity to sell to those people. And I think that's a fascinating part of this process that I'd never considered before.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so you take the city of Sacramento. The city of Sacramento has a $1 billion budget. Right. The state of California has, it's fluctuating because of our finances, but it fluctuates right now, it's hovering somewhere between about $290 billion to $300 billion. School districts, have equivalent budgets. So, again, if your goal is, I want to be at $5 million in 5 years or 10 years, what are you looking at from an annual basis? It's 250,000. And then who can pay that kind of money? And maybe it's a two-pronged approach. So to me, you should have private targets, which should be individual. So, if you're selling shirts, going back to that example, how many shirts can you sell at, a college basketball game in your area, at a high school basketball game? That's the private sector, right? How much money can you make there? Can you make $125,000 by doing that? Are there 12,000 people that'll give you $10 for your shirt, right? Kind of thing. But then the other half of that can come from public sources. So, is there a school district or a city that through a combination of their resources would pay you something that gets you to $125,000? And that's how you start to deconstruct your goal. So once you have your goal, again, after know thyself, know thy product, know thy marketplace, you start to put together your strategic plan. Your strategic plan should have your goal. Once you get your goal, you then start to deconstruct or develop strategies that help you start to break those things down into bite-sized pieces so that every week and every month you're measuring and saying, am I getting closer or further away from where I want to be by the end of the year?
Hey, what do you think of the NFIB? And that's the National Federation of Independent Business.
Yeah, that's a broad question. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to encourage that when you speak as a business owner, assume that the people aren't versed or experts on what you do. And government has this problem a lot, is that we use a ton of acronyms that no one knows what the heck we're talking about, right? So I'm going to suggest that whatever you speak of, the quickest way to lose a customer is for them to not understand what the heck it is you're even talking about. Now, as it pertains to your question, I would ask to be a little bit more specific. So you say, what are my thoughts? That's a very broad question. And I can answer it very broadly, but I don't know if that helps. And so I'll answer it broadly. And then if it's more specific as you want, let me know. So I think that when you look at our political system, right, I would say the two biggest points of tension are business and labor, right? I would say that those are the two arguably most powerful stakeholder constituencies within our political system. And the reason why I sort of allude to these tensions is because oftentimes that there's policies that both entities are proposing that conflict with one another. Minimum wage was a hot topic. That is a perfect example of that. So oftentimes labor, and again, this is a generalization, labor in general will be proposing something like increasing the minimum wage. And they'll do that because they say their why is that, it raises the quality of living for people in communities. Then you'll have business on the other side saying, well, while that may be true, if you hurt our bottom line and we have to close up shop or lay off people as a result, then what you're doing is actually cutting your nose to spite your face, right? Those are the arguments on both sides. So while in theory, you're raising the minimum wage because it's going to quote unquote help community, But if the people who actually provide jobs to community have to go out of business, then you really didn't do anything. You're back at kind of square one. So with that being said, when you look at these entities, NIFB or DGS or Cal OSBA or, you know, the chambers, whatever these organizations are that represent business interests, I think it becomes challenging. One, because business is not homogenous, right? Even when you talk about small business, it's hard to define, you know, we can put a number on it, but $5 million in California, it's fairly decent. That's not the same as a person who's making $50,000 a year in their business or $500,000 a year in their business, or a person who may be a solopreneur. Maybe your business is comprised of one person versus your business is comprised of 5 people, right? So it's very hard for these organizations to represent a body of people that is so diverse and has so many different issues. It's hard to kind of wrap your arms around them and make sure that you're fairly and adequately representing them. So that's kind of my general as well as kind of specific I can get given that question.
Yeah, and you know, the NFIB is a very specific question, a very specific organization.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially their sweet spot is small businesses that have 20 employees or less.
Mm-hmm.
And they advocate on a national level. Things that I have seen, I'm a big fan of the NFIB. Am I a member? Well, contact me, maybe I'll join. But I'm not right now, but I do appreciate the website and the work that they do in research and other areas. The next question has to do with a lot of the money being available for the state of California for low-income housing. I don't understand if this question is from a procurement perspective or whatever, but do you have any comments on the impact of about $100 million available for low-income housing?
Yeah, so to contextualize that question, Governor Newsom, when he announced his first budget, January 10, 2019, he essentially quintupled the amount of resources available for affordable housing. I'll include kind of low-income housing in that. With that being said, it's still not really nearly enough money. When we put the amount of money available in the state budget for housing, it's only about 1.3% of the overall budget. So to put that in context, as we know, education gets anywhere from about 50 to 52%. The next highest line item is health and human services. That gets 27%. Transportation and public safety are about 11 and 9% respectively. So if you think about the percentage I just gave you and the fact that we got there under Gavin, that tells you where we are. And that's what I talk about, us doing our homework, right? Us becoming study, because if we just say a number, it sounds amazing. Oh, you know, we have $100 million, that sounds great. And it is, because from 1986, which is when the state got involved in funding low-income housing, until Gavin took over, that number, as I said, was about 80% less than that. So Gavin did a lot to push the number, but we're still a long way from where we need to be in terms of the percentage of our budget spent on that. But the other side of that is that we can't keep pouring water into a bucket that has a hole in it. And what I mean by that is that housing is only affordable depending on how much you earn. So if people's ability to earn a living or to make a profit, if you're a business, continues to flatten and to decrease, you're never going to have enough affordable housing. So we have to find this delicate balance between how do we ensure that we have a healthy marketplace? How do we ensure that we have a healthy business environment so that businesses can pay people adequately and fairly? Because if that's the case, then where people choose to spend their money, they have options. And we have to keep trying to figure out how do we depress the market in housing so that we can get people in it, because we're depressing wages and profits on the other side of it. So we have to figure out that delicate balance in the marketplace so that we're not having unintended consequences by tinkering on one side without understanding the impact on the other end of the market.
Okay, we're running out of time. Let's hit the chat box, see if we got a question there. Kat, thanks for your comments. Do you have Maureen putting in the resources? There's information on the NFIB. Also, Google reviews. If you find this of value, please leave us a Google review. Also, getting up here, there's the contact information for Jovan. Also, up here is, as I go backwards through your chat file, is how to sign up as an SBDC client. And, you know, really, essentially, You've paid your taxes already, and that's where your SBDC consultants. You get business consulting based on the fact that you've paid taxes. So if you take advantage of that, we're here for you. There's the Corporate Transparency Act, which requires the beneficial ownership information. And also, that's about it. So I think that's about it for today. Pretty much a wrap. We will be back next week. There's how you contact us at the SBDC. We will be back next week for webinar number 318, or is it 317? You'll have to wait and find out next week. So for Jovan Agee, great information, fantastic. Actually, I'm not in for you. Do you have any final comments?
No, just thank you for having me. And again, you can have all the great talent at your disposal, but if you're not going to get engaged, if you're not going to take the time to try to learn and understand the importance of the resources that are being brought to you, you can't expect the outcomes that you desire. So just want to thank you for conducting this conversation and continue to try to bring important information and people to the people of the Southern Central Valley.
And as I like to say, you don't have to be a political animal, but it'd be nice if you were a political mammal. So that'll wrap this week's webinar. So we'll be back next Wednesday, everybody. Have a great week. We will see you then.